and welcome back to yet another episode of the Gameable Audio, a VGM podcast. Now it's time to move back into the normal schedule of releasing episodes and everything and not have all those pre-recorded Nordic game ones. I am super happy that we had those, and I was very honored to be invited to have my podcast at that event. But now as we're moving on, we're going to go in and talk a little bit more about game music and games specifically. And this week, as everybody might already know, we're going to talk about the game Valheim. And for this, we also have the composer for the game, Patrik Jarlestam. Hello!
Hello, hello. Lovely to get to be here.
It feels so weird to say your name in English, though.
I know, exactly. It's because I'm living in Australia now. I've had to get used to people calling me Pat instead of Patrik, and that also took a fair amount of time to get used to.
So they usually tend to just shorten it to Pat down in Australia?
Pat or Paddy, absolutely.
Okay.
And they have no... I mean, Jarlestam doesn't really work down here, so it's all manner of Jarlestrom. I think when I actually just say it in my Scandinavian accent, people get the Jarlestam the best instead of me trying to sort of pseudo-British, say it in a pseudo-British way.
But it feels weird that Patrik doesn't fall well in that kind of sense. Maybe they do that from time to time, but still kind of go to Pat instead.
They have a tradition here of shortening everything. So Pat or Paddy is... Lots of Irish Paddies have been here and lots of English Pats. So... that's what you do. The Australians love shortening everything.
It feels like the new age of people where everything is just getting shorter and shorter. The English language is so messed up today with kids. But anyway, It is an honor to have you here today. This is not your first rodeo with me. We actually had a little bit of time to talk and get to know each other when I did this podcast in Swedish, when we talked about the game Lake Ridden. But for people that does not know you previous to Valheim, for example, or even Lake Ridden, would you care to tell this little story about yourself? Like, where did everything start out for you?
Now I have to ransack my memory to see where did I come from. I loved video games for a very long time. Me and my sister played a lot of video games, and we especially were enamored by Final Fantasy, and I love games like Chrono Trigger and Chrono Cross, a lot of the Japanese RPGs. And I had this idea that I wanted to, after high school, gymnasiet, as we say in Swedish, I wanted to go out in Europe and travel and learn more languages because I specialized in languages during high school, but I had no money. So got a job, and it was really boring. And one of the best things you can have in life is a really boring job, because that forces you to make choices about what you actually want to do instead. And so I thought, video game composer, that's what I want to do. And I put time into learning more about the craft, applying to the Gotlands Tonsättarskola, the Composers School of Gotland, which is sort of like TAFE level if you're talking from Australia, but pre-college probably from America. And so I went there for 2 years and had this... Initially, I had quite a clash with hearing the modern art music, the modern classical music, because a lot of that for me was not music, but because I had really lovely classmates and friends there, and we talked a lot about what is music and how do you listen to music when you're trying to find melody and rhythm and it's not there. And so I was invited into this new world of music that I hadn't heard or understood before, and now I feel I carry both those traditions, the video game world, but also the modern classical music and the techniques from there that I used to compose music. And I feel that has really, really helped me create my own voice in the video game world.
Okay. But previous to the teachings at Gotland, did you have any previous education or teaching surrounding any instruments or music from before?
I was a guitarist. Yeah. No, I was a guitarist, and I took lessons at Musikskolan, in guitar and then later piano. And I think that because I listened a lot to progressive metal music, I wanted to understand the music firstly as a guitarist, but then I wanted to understand how does the keyboard player look at and understand the music. So I took piano lessons. And then during the Gotland time, I did percussion lessons and marimba and sort of trying to understand it from the drummer's perspective.
Was this also on your own accord that you took these classes, or was this your parents that wanted you to take these?
No, I was inspired by my dad, who had learned quite late in life. I think he started learning guitar when he was 35, 36.
Oh,
and
okay.
I thought that was quite cool, but I wanted to learn other styles of music. So, of course, with both my parents' encouragement, I took lessons. I think it was all of us wanted to do it. I really enjoyed it. But as we know in Sweden, you had to, I don't know how it is today, but you had to start with recorder blockflötes lessons. And that did not go too well. It's a wonderful instrument, just not in my hands.
Yeah, okay.
So I was lucky that I got a spot quite quickly after, I think, 2 years. I got to play guitar, and I was so happy that I got to do that. And then I think that was the start of the rest of my musical career and happiness.
But that sounds great. But then after Gotland, what came after that one then? So with Gotland, you should be around, is it like 20 around years old?
I was 21 when I finished there, yeah. There's a whole group of people from Gotland who go around when they're about to finish their courses, and they applied for any of the music universities in Sweden. And I applied for Stockholm, Gothenburg, Malmö, and was accepted in Stockholm, which I'm really happy about, because that's the style of teaching and how the courses were laid out really fit me well. And I'm super happy to have gone there, made some great friends and had some fantastic teachers. Jesper Nordin, Karin Renqvist, and of course the teachers at Gotlands Tonsättarskola as well. I had so many good teachers, it's hard to almost remember them by name now that I'm thinking about it here, but Johan Hammert, more will come to me, but basically thank you all the teachers from both Gotlands Tonsättarskola and Kungliga Musikhögskolan in Stockholm for everything you've taught me. And I had a fantastic time there for 5 years doing both a bachelor and masters of composition.
Now that sounds absolutely amazing, and also for you to remember all these names as well. I mean, they need to be really good teachers that for you to remember them with such passion still today.
Absolutely. I mean, it's also because I've gone back and seen them, and I've worked together with some of them in a professional capacity. I did some work together with Jesper Nordin and Reactional Software, which is a cool software that works with being able to change musical material on the fly in a video game engine. So you can compose the music as you would normally, but you can change it by attaching it to different parameters in the game. And that, I think, is going to herald some really interesting new music coming out of that software, working with that software.
Oh, cool. And then working onward from that, you're getting more experience with implementation then, I guess, a little bit there with this Reaction software?
Reactional was actually this year, so that was quite late.
Okay.
But back in the day, I tried to hang out with lots of people who would make video games. So on Gotland, I went and made friends at the university because they had a course in making video games. And after that, in Stockholm as well. And of course, I have many friends and some family members who work in video games down in Skåne as well. So trying to make friends and just hanging out in that world, because then you would get to be invited to fun parties and you would get to be invited to work on game projects together, which has been really fun. And I was lucky that I had a friend from high school who invested in a game called Mortal Online, and through that I got to meet the people making it, and so compose part of the soundtrack for Mortal Online 1.
Yeah, and Mortal Online, if I remember correctly, was quite of a successful game. A lot of people did play it, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know the numbers of that one, but I know that they've released Mortal Online 2, of course, and so they're still here, they're still making the game, which is pretty cool, especially for an MMORPG.
Yeah, and in Sweden as well. Not a lot of MMOs in Sweden. I know Mind Arc with Project Entropia and Mortal Online.
Yes, I can't really say many other ones either, and it's from Malmö, which is quite fun, so it's local.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing. But moving on from that then, what kind of came after that part then?
You know that you have to, as a composer for video games, quite often go into a career of being freelance, and when you have other more traditional education, not lineages, but when you've done engineering, for example, you usually work a couple of years and build up your own network, and then you go and become a contractor or a freelancer. But as a video game composer, you have to start out immediately because there are so few roles where they employ you part-time or full-time. That's my experience. So
Yeah.
I had to go at it freelance. So I worked in different computer and multimedia stores and did music composition for video games freelance on the side, together with doing music for live classical concerts and sound and light design for classical concerts as well.
So in this case, were you doing like a part-time on both, or were you working full-time and having like an extra job with the composition on the side? Like, how was the hours kind of distributed?
I worked part-time mostly at the computer stores, so usually three days a week, but that would go up, sometimes 2, sometimes 5. And whenever a project came in, then I had work, so I could move it around and I could dedicate time to working on the project. And that was basically the most important thing to me, to have a stable kind of income to take me from project to project. And when a project came up, I could invest time into it.
Okay. And that is also something I hear is pretty common. Like you said, that so small amounts of opportunities for people to work in-house or even to work with just a studio as a partnership, etc., that a lot of people go into freelance and so on. So for you, you started out quite early going part-time on both with composition and working. How was it for you at that point of state? It was still quite early, I would say, for years when we're talking about indies are starting to kind of pop up and so on more during this time period, right? It's like how easy was it to find different kind of jobs for composition at this point in time?
It wasn't that easy because I finished my studies in 2012 and then going into 2013 to just finish off the last essay. And during this time, I was studying, so I had heaps of different concert projects more and just small game projects on the side. While if we're looking from 2013 to 2019, it was more building a career, doing projects, really fun and different and interesting things. And I was lucky that I have friends and family who work in the video game business who would say that, there's a new developer, they're going to do a project, you want to talk to them and be a part of that. And so that's sort of how you and I met initially when we worked for Sozap.
Yes, indeed.
Because your colleague, or our colleague, was a friend of my brother-in-law, and that sort of, through that, I was connected to him.
Yeah, and that is also one really interesting thing when it comes to Sweden specifically. Even though we have such a high amount of export of video games from Sweden that earns a lot of money to Sweden, the sector for being a game developer is really small. Like, everybody knows each other. Do you feel the same of being a third part? Like, do you feel it's easy to follow game development for Sweden specifically, since you have so many contracts in Sweden specifically?
I feel like Sweden's the kind of place where if you're not known, it's hard to get work in this field. But if you are, then people will come and ask you for things. Which is really lovely, but it's a testament that you have to have staying power to make it in this line of work. And it wasn't until I was basically working on Lake Ridden where I was getting close to being able to be full-time just a composer and sound designer, because I run the company Solid Sounds together with my colleague Malin Håkansson in Sweden, and now also an Australian colleague called Carla Dobby. And we had to just have staying power. And I think that's one of the, if I'm going to give any tips to people, what is some of the most important things to have? It's, of course, be good at your craft and do it in a way that you enjoy doing it, because you will have to put in many hours into doing it, but you will also be proud of those hours. But also having staying power, because there will be points in people's lives where they have to reevaluate, is the freelance life what they want to do or can do? And if you have staying power and keep at it and keep in there will be a point where there's not many people left, and it's you they're going to turn to. And that's been part of my recipe for success, that I love doing what I do, and I also have been at it for quite a while. I think I've been in video games now for 16 years.
Yeah, that's a couple of years, they usually say.
It is. Exactly.
But on the wording you're saying, staying power, you're referring a little bit to like being eager or being stubborn enough to stay in this section, right?
Enjoy it enough that you don't give up, yes.
That is also one thing I usually tend to see, especially with younger composers, that they're trying to make their best work already from the start, and they provide that one, and they don't get that kind of traction or engagement with that sound, that they feel like they're really, really bad, even though they are most likely not.
Yes. It's because there's no validation with a successful project early on. I mean, it's the same for classical composers, mostly, that I like the idea of a classical composer in the sense that you know it's going to take time to perfect your techniques and your craft, and you won't be writing your best things when you're young. Mostly, there are a couple of fantastic composers who wrote really great things young, and that was not me. It took me quite a while, and I know that I have even better things in me, but it's going to take time to achieve that. I used to as a personal just anecdote, but I used to joke that my life is so good I won't ever write any really good music. And then sadly my mum passed away just before COVID, and I had some hardships in life. And I think after that I started writing really good music that tells a story. I've always been interested in telling a story, but a really personal one. And I have a feeling that a lot of people, especially with the Valheim soundtrack, can relate to the music in a strong way. So that was a big changing point for me. But I mean, to say that until 2021, I'd started writing video game music in 2008. And it wasn't until 2021 I could support myself fully on music and sound design. So it definitely has taken quite a while. But I'm happy I'm here now.
But just give perspective. I like that. And moving on from, we're currently by Lake Ridden. And at this point in time, was it at this point in time you did create Solid Sounds, or was it a little bit previous to Lake Ridden as a project that you created the company?
It was slightly previously. We didn't have the name Solid Sounds at the time because this is the funny story about how Marlon and I met yet again, because we actually played in the same cover band when we were in high school. Just after high school, we were connected through a mutual friend in the band. And then she went off to travel the world, and I went off to do my things. And one day when I've returned to Malmö from living in Stockholm, I walk into a Björn Borg retail store, and there she is working. And we started reconnecting and chatting, and she does a lot of voiceovers for advertisements.
Oh, okay.
And so I said, I actually need I need some voiceover stuff, help with the game I'm working on. And so we collaborated on that game, and then we liked working together, so we continued. And Lake Ridden was our first really big production of working together, where I wrote most, if not all, of the soundtrack, and Marlon and I did the sound design and voiceover recording together of both her and other roles. And we've been basically running together and working together. I think we had each our own sort of sole trader, enskild firma, back then. But now we're running it more with bigger things.
And that sounds great. It's nice that you can create something, work through it, and create something beautiful out of it. I think there's no other better way to feel positive about yourself, that you can actually engage and make sure something grows as well.
Exactly. And that's the same thing with games. When you get to sit there and play the game that you worked so hard at getting all the things in and composing for it, doing sound effects and implementing it, and then you see how good it sounds, and also you see the happiness that it brings people. That is a fantastic feeling.
Do you actually have time to play the games that you work on, or do you usually just jump from project to project nowadays?
Nowadays, there's not much time to play the games. I do set aside time for some of the things. I have played about 120 hours of Valheim. I think it's a really fun game to play with friends. And I completely understand why it became such a big hit during COVID. And there's lovely stories. A friend of mine met her fiance through Valheim. And she's Australian, he's from Spain. And they now live in Australia together. I think that's super cool.
That's amazing. I love when I read stories about that or hear about them. That really fills my heart with joy all the time.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, considering before we like dive straight into, is there anything else you want to fill in from Lake Ridden to up till Valheim at this point in time?
Yeah, so when I was working at the end stages of Lake Ridden, I met my previous partner and exported myself to Australia. And so that's the reason I'm here. I live sort of between Sydney, Australia, and Sweden. And that was a big change because as I was gaining traction in Sweden and getting jobs in the video game world, I suddenly moved halfway across the world and lost a couple of jobs because I was not in Sweden anymore, because we were not as open to working remotely at a bigger scale yet. Smaller games and indie developers in Sweden had no problem working with me working from home
remotely,
or from exactly. But the big companies didn't really like that at all. So that was a tough thing to go through to sort of.
But how did it make you feel at this point in time, losing like higher clients that most likely paid a little bit better than an indie studio could do?
It sucked because it felt like I put all of this time into something that I was seeing very visibly that I was losing out on. And I tried looking here in Australia, but the video game industry has not come as far yet as it has done in Sweden. Stuff is happening now. There's been changes in how you can invest into the video game world. There's lots of stuff happening both in New Zealand and in the state of Victoria, but that was not back then. So I felt like, okay, I will probably have to choose another line of work. Still with music, but I won't get to do the video games for a while. But I never really gave up on it, and I'm happy I didn't.
So, for example, I know for a fact that there's a little bit more surrounding like smaller films and so on in Australia. Is that something you kind of dabble into instead of video games at the start?
That would have been fun. They actually do quite big movies here. Like many of the Marvel movies, if I understand it correctly, are made here. For the game we've been recording for now, which is not announced yet, so I'm hoping to be able to talk about that at another point. The jazz double bass player we hired for that project, she is one of the big singers for Planet of the Apes, for example, which was the soundtrack was recorded here in Australia. So there's heaps of big stuff there, but because the video game industry and the movie industry is so different in who works in it, there's almost nobody who knows anyone on the other side of the fence. So I couldn't really easily make any contacts into that world. It's a thing we're looking into, developing contacts into now, because Carla Dobby, who we work together with, is she has a master's of film music and is a jazz trombone player and jazz composer. So that's a line that we would like to go into, but
an explorer there.
Exactly. At the moment, we actually have full-time video game work for probably two of us, and then we have lots of other freelance workers that we bring in when we have bigger contracts that we need to fill.
Okay. And moving on from that point, then, is there any other stop you would like to do before Valheim?
Not really that I know. I mean, we've come up to I can tell a fun sort of backstory with how Valheim happened, because that's one of the questions I've been asked the most. How did I get in contact with the people? Did I know them, or what happened? Yeah. And it's just one of those things that's a long line of different things happening and over time aligning. So in year 9 in school, I swapped schools. Okay. And in my class, there was a guy who I befriended called Björn, and after we didn't hear super much from each other, but I was really good friends with his friend, who I'm still friends with today, and sort of found out that Björn had moved to Norway, worked with Funcom, and he was going to do his own project it's a VR game with Viking music, and asked me if I wanted to compose the soundtrack. So me and Marlin, we drove up or flew up a couple of times to Voss in Norway and worked on music for this VR game called Eye of Odin. Also because of a contact, I was invited to a small-scale VR game jam, which was hosted by a guy from the publisher of Valheim, which is Coffee Stain Studios. And because I worked on a game that won that specific small one, I got to chat more with the guy from Coffee Stain Studios. So I think 1 or 2 years, it was a fair number of years later, he contacted me and asked, have you made any Viking music? Do you know of this Viking music music act. And I said, I have done a couple of tracks, and I sent it to him, and he sent it on to the team who made Valheim. And through that, I got to make some demos with them. And then those demos turned into the beginning of the Valheim soundtrack. And so because I'd done that VR game, because I'd been in this game jam, I had gotten in contact with the right people to be invited into that. And that was just pure happenstance. So that's my third recommendation. Just make friends with heaps of people, because you have no idea who's going to be a good contact. And usually it's not people in the video game industry that are great at that. You just happen to meet people. Just happened to be in this case that I'd gone to, year 9 with a guy, and then worked on making my way up.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, when it comes to a lot of things within game development, it feels like everybody's just like walking around with banana peels under their shoes. Everybody's just slipping in, and all of a sudden I was like, oh, I know this guy. It's like, oh, how do you know this guy? Oh, no, I met him in the grocery store. You're like, what? We just bonded over music or something like that. No, it's crazy stories all the time that you hear from time to time surrounding these, especially in Sweden.
Absolutely. I have another insane one, which I'll just do a shortened version of, because I was asked to do bachelor night, or the bucks night, as we say here in Australia, for my brother-in-law. And I planned how we're going to, with a group of his friends, and they were going out with the company he was working for at the time, and we were going to not kidnap him. We're going to say, I got this freelance job rigging lights for a concert in Germany. I need extra people. Does anybody want to come and help me? And people were going to say yes who knew about this. And of course, no one's going to say yes who doesn't know about this. But this one guy pipes up and says, yeah, I'll come. And I had to take him aside and say, okay, so this is actually Bucks Night. You're very welcome to come if you want to. But that's what this is. And they said, yeah, cool. I'll go grab my toothbrush and I'll join you. So he joined us for that week, and he knew my brother-in-law, but I didn't know him. And later on, he has started a new video game company as well. And we're talking about the potential of collaborating with them. It hasn't happened yet, but that's a crazy story of how I got to know this guy who actually used to live in my hometown where I'm from.
And I can only agree. I mean, this proves the point that it can literally come from anywhere.
Exactly.
So with that said, I think it's time to dive in a little bit more about the actual game and soundtrack we're going to talk about.
Sounds like a good idea.
Sounds like a good idea. Awesome. So the game that everybody is waiting for to hear from, but also get to know a little bit more, is the game Valheim. It is a survival game for 1 up to 10 players, set in a procedural world inspired by the Viking culture. The game here was developed by the Swedish studio Iron Gate AB, and the game itself is still in development. The game has been released since the 2nd of February 2021 and is currently on an early access version available on Steam, etc. And the first track that we're going to listen to, you already spoiled this a little bit to me, so I'm spoiling this to everybody else, but it is one of the more famous tracks for the whole OST, so we're starting here with a bang.
Yes, we are.
And the track's name that we're going to listen to and start off everything is The Meadows, A Place to Rest, from the game Valheim. And there we are fading out the first track of the week, The Meadows, A Place to Rest. And for people that are listening in for the first time to this type of episode, usually I go through what I feel when listening to these songs. So for people to understand a little bit more, I just put on my headset, I lean back in my chair, and I just take in the full track to just get an emotion out of it. So this is the section that I call my emotion. So the emotion that I get from The Meadows' A Place to Rest is, it is a curious track, one that piques adventure and mystery. The string instruments gives a sense of walking, pushing you forward towards something new, but at the same time, something that calms you down. What do you feel about that one, Patrik?
It's an interesting track because when I was looking at what is Viking music initially, I tried to look at historical sources just to get an idea of sort of where we came from, because we've grown up with Viking culture in Scandinavia, but haven't, of course, heard any Viking music. And there were not many instruments from that time. Bone flutes, there's the 3 or 4 stringed, not lyre, but it's a type of like harp string instrument that played with. You can play with bow, you can play with fingers, and stone percussion. So not super much there to use. And I thought, because I was composing this soundtrack in Australia during Australian summer, which is quite hot, and I'm thankful that I grew up in Scandinavia and have walked so much in Scandinavian leafy forests, both pine forests and leafy Scanian forests. I could conjure up how that felt, and that for me is what The Meadows is. It's my experience of walking around Scandinavian forests, and I wanted it really to be a nice place to be. We did do 2 different demos for it, and this is the first demo that I did, and I just liked it, so I stuck with that.
That's awesome. So usually when you process the different music and so on, do you usually make like multiple tracks and so on, and you see what fits for the for the developers that listen in and select songs in the end?
Exactly. I usually do 2 to 3 demos per area if it's not that the first song is an absolute banger straight on. And that's because I usually ask the clients if they have any idea of what music they would like. And even if they don't have an idea, when you're working with different companies, I always ask this, they always have an idea, subconsciously at least. So I get them to dig up what is it that they think that they want, and I'll make something that's in that vein. And the second track is usually like a version of the first style of track, and then the third track is if I think there's something very different that could also evoke something and work well, I do that. So that's the sort of 3-step affair I do when I make.
But here we also have something interesting as well, because you said you were on a game jam working on this VR game with Vikings. So I'm guessing you had some previous like research and so on this subject before started working on Valheim as well.
Yes, I did. And I should also say that during my time at the Royal College of Music, I took a course in Kulning, the Scandinavian folk singing style thing. And my one of my exam master productions was a short opera with folk music singers, folk music musicians, classical musicians, and opera singers, and early music musicians as well. So it's lots of different traditions and ideas coming together. But I love Swedish folk music and Scandinavian folk music in general. And the things I learned about, this is stereotypical about Swedish folk music, is that you have the happy music, which is usually music for dance, like you would come out in summers, and you have Polsko. Polsko can, of course, be both positive and negative, tinged, like in major or minor. But you have that happy dancing music for summer, and then you have the more introspective music for winter when you're inside and it's cold and it's dark. And that's one of the things I wanted to be a dance type of tune. And when you have stuff in 9/8, 3/4, that works really well. So it was meant to be like invoke a type of dance for spring.
So that's why I could kind of feel this kind of adventure sense of walking then, like having that dancey kind of. But when you're talking about the 3/4 and so on, you're talking about the tempo, right? So for people that are not used to.
I'm talking about the time signature, and I'll go a little bit into what my thinking was in this track. So
Yep.
I usually sit with a video I record from the game when I work in my DAW, and it's Logic I usually use. And I loop the video and I just try different things on different instruments until I feel like there's something that resonates with what I'm seeing. And I was playing guitar for this one. I know the guitar is not a Viking style instrument either, but I also didn't want to go very stereotypically Viking music, like I don't remember all of the Viking artists now. Vardruna was the one I was thinking of. Because I think at some point someone had said like, oh, can you make a Vardruna track? Like when we discussed it. I think that we can do something more genuine. And I'm not saying that Vardruna is not genuine. It's an expression of Viking culture from the perspective. I think that's really cool. But it was not how I saw Valheim. Valheim is in the meadows, a lot more light and airy and fun and nice, and I wanted to integrate the folk music into that. So I think Vardruna is very cool. I should just say that. I'm not trying to slander them at all. But when I was playing on guitar, I knew that I wanted to have a chord which was ambiguous if it was major or minor. So I looked at a G7 sus4 chord, which is neither major nor minor. And that the way I play the guitar part is dum dum da bum bum boom bum ba dum ba ba da dum, and that's a sort of lilting 3/4 1 2 3 1 2 3 and 1, and that's the main feeling. But then I usually just add more layers until I find like a mesh, a counterpoint mesh that works. And so I added mandolin, and the mandolin part was more of a 9/16. So even though this sort of takes the same amount of time, a 9/16 feel or a 9/8 is very different from a 3/4, because it's more of a triplet feel, like and so that's what the mandolin does. So you have these two different feels of meter, and 3/4 is meter, 9/16, 9/8 is meter. How you subdivide a bar. And then I have a trick I do in almost all songs if I can, which is I add a theorbo, which is a Baroque Renaissance era lute that's 2 meters long. So for all those people who know Bellman, for example, he plays a tenor lute in most of the photos of him. And if you search for tenor lute, you will find the classic Western lute. But a theorbo is the bass version of that. You just put on a 2 meter long neck and you add bass strings to that. And the cool thing with this is that if you want to add bass to a track, double basses, everyone knows them. Like everyone knows how pizzicato sound. Everyone knows how a double bass with bow sounds. And so many use them in so many tracks. It's so available. And then you have the other bass instruments, which I feel, for example, you have a bass clarinet, or you have a contrabassoon. They're very quirky bass instruments. So having them on all the time, I feel in a track that loops a lot doesn't work as much. They are so characterful that they should they should play roles within the music. And so you don't want to add an electric bass, because electric bass is just such a different sound to classical music.
It will bring like a new era of instruments all of a sudden into the whole mix, and you will kind of break the immersion of where you are, I would believe.
Exactly. And so that's why I add bass lines on a theorbo, because it's a plucked instrument that's not that loud, but of course with samples and recordings you can make it louder than it supposedly is. But it's just such a natural sounding bass that works with so many tracks. That's my sort of hidden little signature gem.
But I think when we're talking about these things as well, I think I have a very suitable question surrounding this from Aurora. And the question follows is, what is the hardest when it comes to creating a soundscape that matches an atmosphere that you're striving for? Like we're talking about so many different kind of instruments and so on. I want to hear a little bit on your thought process surrounding this.
For me, it's the sound. It's the sound and what you play. And I think a technique you develop as a composer is being able to compose regardless if you feel like composing or not. And that works most of the time. And that's what being professional as a composer is. The thing I find the hardest is the initial idea. And that can take a lot of time and a lot of experimenting. And there are days where I could have orchestrated. I could have written multiple layers if I had a foundation already. But finding that initial thing can be so hard. I think it took me about... this was probably end of the first day or beginning of the second day working on Meadows stuff and finding this guitar riff, arpeggiated line. So that took a while, but this was a thing that took relatively short time anyway in the grand scheme of things. If we look at, which we're going to listen to later, some of the other tracks, well, I'll keep secret which ones, but they took 5 complete, almost rewritals to get right. And that was easier in a way. It was a long process, but it was easier because we knew what we aimed for. And Richard, the CEO of Iron Gate, really knows his product well. And he trusted me and I trusted him. And he knew when to say, no, we need to refine this. We need to get this even closer to where it should be. While Meadows was something they liked immediately and continued with.
So when it comes to this track, The Meadows, A Place to Rest, what can you describe a little bit for people that haven't played Valheim? What kind of environment are we in when we're listening to this track?
We're in a very nice meadow. It's open, it's airy. There are big meadow openings surrounded by trees, and usually it's leafy green trees like birch trees. Bukträd. I was going to say bokskog, that's birch. It's funny when you learn all of the names in English for a game, and then you have to think about what are they in Swedish, and vice versa, of course. But it's an open, nice place where you build your first settlement buildings in the game. So it's about collecting stones, it's about chopping wood, it's about building these small abodes where you can put down your bed and save and have a home that you respawn at. So it's a nice place to be that people should want to stay at and come back to. Of course, you have to venture out and mine more stuff in the game, but this is a place to come back and feel nice at. And I heard a story from a musician friend of mine who built his base just on the cusp to the next biome. So we're talking biomes here. So Meadows is a biome with the plants and the trees and the enemies that are there. And the next one you come to usually, not always, but usually is the Black Forest. And it's a different track. And he had put his bass, so most of his bass was actually playing the Black Forest track. and he made the choice to dismantle his bass and move it into the meadow so he would have a nicer time with that theme instead.
Yeah, okay. I can see that. But when it comes to the different tracks as well, this one is about 3 minutes long. And considering you have this MMO, you're collecting resources and so on, how do you feel about tracks smaller or longer, depending on the product itself as well? Like, can you feel like that you want sometimes longer tracks just to feel like, oh, the player's going to play in this area for 20 hours? Do they really want to listen to a 3-minute track?
That's the interesting thing that, of course, we didn't know at the time of making this game that it would be such a massive success and people would be spending thousands of hours. I've met a player who spent 3,200 hours in Valheim, which is massively cool. But of course you get bored of it, or you want to switch it up from time to time, and I don't take offense to that. It's a 3-minute loop that I feel really describes the area. But as with any music, and we're human beings, we want to change the mood that we're in. So some people play their own music, some people turn off the music and then turn it back on, or keep it off, and I think that's all fine. Technique-wise, I want to say I write melodies according to a very old technique that Palestrina, the classical 15th century composer, used, which is so he writes melodies in bows, and arches. So they climb up and then they go down again, and you always have to be wary of equalizing the power of a melodic jump. So when you go stepwise up, you don't have to equalize it, but when you make a jump, you have to equalize that energy over time somehow to balance it out. Classical music is so much about balance and contrast. And he makes the likeness to, if you're going up a mountain, when you're at the base of the mountain, you can take giant leaps. And so you can make these jumps melodically. But when you get higher up, you can only take smaller steps, which means that you can only go stepwise when you come up. And then you have to equalize that going down. And in the same way that you have to start out with the small steps going down, then you can make the more bigger leaps. And that's a style of melodic writing that lends itself very well to video games, because they're not super catchy. They're not pop catchy melodies. I've never been extremely good at that. My colleague Marlon is a lot better at the really catchy, memorable ones. But I know that my style of melody is really good for games that you play a long time, because they take time to get into, but then they are very memorable in their essence because you've spent the time with them and not grown bored of them. So that I know that works, and that's one of the strengths of that compositional technique.
That sounds amazing. And on the topic of listening to tracks for too long or something like that, since everybody who's listening in on this episode is most likely going to play Valheim after we're done with this episode, should we move on to the next track maybe, so they don't keep to listen to the meadows all the time?
I think we should.
Awesome. I think it was a great segue, right?
Yeah, very, very smooth.
Smooth McFly, call me. No,
oh, yeah.
So the next track that we're going to listen to is the amazing track called The Forest is Moving. The forest is moving, and my emotion for this one, it gives off a boss chase battle of some sort. It grabs you with the darker sections of the track, and the intense, I guess it's violins in this one. I'm a little bit unsure, but it has some sort of string instrument anyway. It gives a sense of urgency, so be quick about it.
Exactly. You're very right.
So what please draw the picture for me here. What are we doing within Valheim when this track is playing? Because it feels like some battle music of some sort. But I really have this like boss battle chasing you. You're just gonna escape.
Exactly. It's not a boss battle, but it's a sort of scripted event battle in that you've built your extra base or your normal base in the Black Forest, and you feel like you're safe. You built your walls around it, and then suddenly you get this special event called The Forest is Moving, and it's where basically hordes spawn and attack you, and you either have to fend them off or survive until sort of daylight breaks. I think it's usually when day comes. And so we wanted to give this sense of urgency, like you're saying, because you don't really know where they're coming from, and your map is not going to necessarily help you as much. It just shows this is the epicenter of where something big is going to happen. And percussion is always great, like we talked about.
Yes.
Like, big drums are always good for creating energy and movement forward. And this is made like a 4-part increase in intensity. So it starts off with just drums and this, I would call it a sort of hectic bass line. Boom, bam, ba-dum, bam, ba-da, ba-boom, ba-ba-gam. Together with the drums, and then every time the increase in level, which can be that there's more enemies or more time has passed in the game, more stuff is added. And you're absolutely right. It's basically a string orchestra. So you have violins, second violins, violas, cellos, double basses, all working together and building up, together with brass instruments. We're talking trombones, we're talking French horns, because they have that sort of warm color that comes in and pushes the bar forward, going... And we call that a swell in a very non-technical term.
I mean, for me, it sounds almost like it could be some sort of transaction or transition as well.
It's those kinds of things, swells. This is behind-the-scenes techniques of composing. Being able to glue musical material together when sometimes it doesn't cross over as well as it should into something else. It's percussion, usually cymbals that you play, like you play them soft with soft mallets, and so you get that is great for gluing different parts of music together using a bass drum, or not a kick drum of a drum kit, like a small kick drum. We're talking a big 40-inch or 36-inch bass drum is really good for dom, dom, dom to create. They sort of take over what your ears are listening to and then feeds you into the next area. And having these brass swells, something that pops out at your ears and then suddenly you're in another part of the music is really helpful for gluing stuff together. And that's what this track does a lot. It's sort of high energy, but also standing still because you're in the same location. I wanted the music to be both standing still and pushing you, forcing you forward.
Okay. And considering this track is about a little bit more than 5 minutes. I'm guessing, since you're saying this is some sort of event with an epicenter showing like this is where shit is going down. Does it mean that the event itself also is about 5 minutes, since you have these kind of stages going up, making it more intense?
I actually don't know how long the event lasts, but things can happen. So because in the game it can fade between the 4 different loops, every loop is equally as long. You can go quicker to a higher intensity if certain things happen. I think if you leave it and don't attack them, yes, you will go to the higher levels. I think you'll go to level 3 quite quickly. But if you keep it at bay, then you will not go as quickly until higher level enemies come and attack you.
So in the game, it's more dynamic than sound-wise than what we hear on the soundtrack.
Exactly, and because we couldn't represent that in a good way on Spotify or in the soundtrack, this is sort of the logical increase, and you get to grow with the track.
Okay, so the track itself is made up of these kind of sections then that you just put up in one long track then?
Exactly, or in 4 different tracks that just fade in between each other. But yeah, exactly, as one long track.
Sounds good. And also it's so interesting that when I read the title, The Forest is Moving, I'm thinking a little bit about Vikings and monsters and so on. I actually thought about treants or something like that at first. I was like, oh.
Exactly. You are very right, because the main enemies of the Black Forest, they are these grey dwarf, which is like a tree, somewhere between a tree and an old uncle type character that roam the forest. So it is exactly what you hear.
Ah, okay. But I like when there's connections between titles and actually events inside the game. Sometimes, I mean, theoretically, The Forest is Moving could theoretically be just monsters running around in the forest, like creating the motion inside the forest as well. So there's like 2 different kind of aspects of how you could interpret the text itself.
Exactly. And the idea with this also was initially to just be a test for battle music generally in the game when you went into any battle. But we decided in the end that we just needed it for special occasions. And when you fight monsters, that's just normal part of life.
Yeah, okay. The music itself is not dynamic in combat for Valheim, more that the events are putting pressure on you then with the music.
Exactly.
Okay. But when you made this track, what was the hardest thing when you were thinking about what kind of was the information? Did you know that it were going to be a horde wave-based event that's like, oh, we need kind of multiple tracks that need to step up in between depending on how intense it's going to be, or what was the thought here?
It's hard to remember exactly what we started out with. I think that the first loop you hear was an idea for just general battle music, but then they said, oh, let's use it for this event instead. And then I knew immediately, because that's a thing that I had worked with SOSAP Arm Heist game, of working with different levels and adding intensity. So I used a very similar technique and just added more. I think the challenge was because it's more loop based, you have to make the loops interesting, and you have to add these small happenings all the time to keep it fresh, even though it's similar material that's looping. And I'm really happy with how the 4th loop turned out, because it has that both string orchestra melody-ish, but you also have the back and forth détaché, meaning like bowing back and forth.
Yeah.
Sort of rising line that then goes down to the bases again and starts to build again. So it's like a sawtooth wave. You go up this hill and then you fall down a cliff and you start building again.
But considering about composition technique you were talking previous about that you were so fond of. Is this a technique that you could use when making this type of battle music, or do you usually tend to lean to other techniques and so on for battle music specifically?
Battle music doesn't have to be memorable melody-wise. I think for bosses, it's fun to play with that. But it's more about energy than being catchy. So I felt that as soon as I got all of the drums, the percussion bits in place, then I had the basis to sort of build this little statue on top of. So that the energy was much more important than what melodic things were being played on top.
Yeah. And how is it composition-wise to work from this when you're working with intensity instead? Does it change much in the process of composition, or does it not?
It changes with which instruments you can use, because of course low intensity instruments won't work. You won't hear them, or you can use them in the beginning if you want really low energy. But then you will need stronger and stronger things. That's why when I say percussion is basically anything you can hit that you think sounds nice. There's everything from you can hit anvils, you can have cymbals, you can have brake drums from cars, up to marimbas, like wooden. I wouldn't call them pianos, but for people who haven't seen a marimba, they're wooden bars that ring in like tonal heights. You can play melodies on them. Or many of those have lots of energy in them, and then you need to. And the other instruments that are also really strong are brass instruments, trombones, trumpets, French horns. It's cool to think that with like a whole symphony orchestra, the idea is that all of the sections are balanced with each other and can sound sort of at the same level when they play maximum and minimum. It's not always true, but if you think about that, you have probably a first violin section that has 18 people playing in it, and that can be measured up to with 2 or 3 trombones. They can sound as loud as 18 people. So with that, you know how loud brass can be because they don't need the numbers; they have the power within them. So they're great instruments to have that. But string instruments are fantastic when you have doing stuff in octaves. So you have the lowest, like the bass providing the foundation, then an octave above that you have the cello. And even though you can't necessarily hear the cello when all of the percussion is playing and all of the brass is playing, they add stability to the line, and then you have the violas helping out with that as well, and then second violins, and above that the first violins, and all of those together just sound massive in a way that complements the colors of all the other instruments. A symphony orchestra is like it's a beast that's been developed over hundreds of years to what it is today, and how it clings together, and it's a marvelous beast.
Well, considering this track specifically now, I think this is going to be an interesting question, at least for me. We'll see if you think the same. But which instrument in this track was the least expected one you had?
Ooh, that's a good question. I would probably have to go back and look at it. But I know that the bass sample I use in the first loop is... I mean, theoretically, you could play it on a bass, but it's a loop that's been layered. It's a synthesizer sampled, edited instrument that's been edited to sound as cool as possible. And I think that in the spirit of things, everything else in the track is very playable by real instruments. But I feel like the bass line, getting that intensity of that line is really hard with real instruments. You could do it, of course, with microphones and all of that, because it's the combination of miking up an instrument from a couple of meters away to very close to the instrument to get the thickness and density. But that for me was unexpected, because I just heard the rhythm of it. I knew that this is the rhythm I need to build the fundament. The rest is very classical symphony orchestra, but that one I was super happy with. It's from Omnisphere. It's a sample synthesizer that's incredibly powerful and does heaps of great things.
But even for this track, just like you talked about with the Meadow, that you had a clip of the game playing and you added the music in order to get the correct vibe and atmosphere for it. Was this the same, that you had a video clip of the event itself playing out and you added the music to it? Is that a common process for you to work with?
It's a very common process. I think I had just general battle in the Black Forest initially, for it that I tried out the percussion for. But then when we swapped over to this event, I added a video for the event and continued to compose on top of that.
Okay. Sounds
So yeah,
interesting.
that's my modus operandi. Always compose to what the game looks like. And most of the time, it works out equally as well in the game. But there are times where I've composed a thing, but maybe I've used a part of the video that gave me a very different feel for how that section ends up in the game afterwards, and I'll have to go back and edit it. But I would say probably 90% of the time, it works as well as I'd hoped.
Okay. Well, working with a process that is also, well, the game itself is still in early access, and things can be subject to change. Does that also go with the music, or do they, like, they can change an event if that has happened? I don't know, since I haven't played the game, just have that stated.
Not much has happened with changing music over time, because it's mostly a process of going forward. But we have taken in getting musicians to record certain things that were not recorded in the original one. Like I didn't have a violinist playing on the boss theme for Mother the Dragon, but we recorded that afterwards and updated that in the game. And I think that's in the spirit of being early access, that if you feel that you can do something better and you want to do it, then you do it. Because it's not set in stone until version 1.0 comes out.
Yeah, exactly. Now, I feel from a perspective from some composers I've talked to, is like, if you could return to make something new with a track, would you do it? Sometimes I hear the questions being answered with, yes, I would like to go back since I have so much more understanding of certain things. And others are like, no, I wouldn't, because this is my baby. I released it and I'm happy with it. Now I can move forward, creating like the next opus magnus.
Yes.
But how do you feel working on early access from that perspective, that you actually might have the access to return to make something, to change something?
I think it's really cool. I think that when you're starting out as a composer, then I mean, of course, at any stage as a composer, you know what you know, and you can always learn more. But I feel really happy where I am as a composer now, because I feel like I have the understanding of what the product needs musically, and I can also do it. So if I revisit something, it's not because it didn't end up what I wanted. It's just that these one or two things will make it a track that I'm 100% happy with. A track we will talk about later, for example, we revisited because the original one became a real big hit with the people who played the game, and the people spent a lot more time at the place where this theme was played, and so I wanted to make a longer one, just expanding on it. And so I think the original one was probably just over a minute, and the finished one is almost 4 minutes long.
Okay.
So that was a nice thing, but that one is coming up later.
Yep. And talking about things that are coming up later, I guess it's better to go sooner than later. So what about the third track of the week?
What a nice segue that was.
I'm really nailing the segues this week.
You absolutely are. Let's chat about the next song. Yes.
Yes. So the next one we're going to listen to, we're going out on the water with Out for a Sailing Adventure. out for a sailing adventure. And the emotion for this one, right from the bat here, the drums gives off the classic Viking boat rhythm. The drums they use in movies to keep the pacing for everybody who's like rowing and paddling there. But listening to the full track, I cannot avoid getting the feeling with similarities to the Zelda, the Wind Waker. And the use of drums there, the horn and the strings. The track itself is very calming, just like the sea is to me.
Ooh, nice finish there.
Yeah. Now, when it comes to me, there's nothing so serene and calming for me and my soul that me going down to the Bay Area and just sitting on a stone listening to the water just splashing around. It's really nice for me, and I really got that feeling listening to this track as well, to have that calming feeling, even though I wasn't listening to water per se. So I really like this track.
Well, thank you.
It was one that really stood out. But considering everything else, did you have any reference to Zelda, the Wind Waker here that I got?
I've played Zelda Wind Waker, and you're absolutely right that I wanted to have a rhythm of rowing, and that was what the percussion track was, the boom, boom, percussion. And also, of course, the choice of strings for softness when the wind is picking up, but you also have the valor, the adventure of the French horn, which is playing plays the main melody here. And I can't help but think that having lived both in Stockholm, which is a city by the sea, and in Sydney, which is also a beautiful city by the sea, that of course has played a part in influencing this. And of course it feels very Viking-y. Of course there are prior the instrumentation, the instruments I use is of course there's previous precedent in how movies have done and what they've used. Similar effect. That's the cool thing with brass. Brass can be very smooth and mellow. It can also be powerful and energy rich, and it's nice playing between those two. I want to say the guy who plays the main melody here, his name is Michael H. Dixon, who's he's a French horn player, but he's also a composer in his own right, and a not multitone, it's called quarter-tone specialist. So
okay,
which is really cool. So he's a very accomplished musical fellow, and he plays French horn in a way that sounds almost more like a trombone than a French horn, but with such smoothness and richness. And he's just he's a fellow.
They're very different instruments, so
exactly. I mean, it's just that it's fantastic that you can have an instrument, but it sounds so different. And I think about that every time I hear someone playing a tenor saxophone from a jazz tradition, or they play from a classical. It's the same instrument, but it just has such a different timbre. But yeah, this, I should also say for those listening who haven't played Valheim, that this track plays whenever you're out on the ocean on any type of sailing vessel. It could be a raft, could be a boat, but when you reach a certain speed, then this starts to play. So it's a very nostalgic feel for a lot of people who play the game, that when they finally succeed in getting wind coming the right way and the sails go up and they gain speed, and then suddenly this starts, and
they're rewarded with the music, basically.
Exactly. And I was sent quite a cool message from a YouTuber who said that they had been out sailing with their friends around the Bahamas, and they had when the wind picked up, they had blasted this on the not the PA system, but the stereo system they had, and just really felt Valheim out on the real open ocean. And for me, it's so cool how this lives. It's bigger than just me composing it for a game. It's part of people's experiences now, and that is really cool.
But for me, listen to the horn, for example. I mean, considering all how you process and so on, from what I could try and guess, you're not a horn player at all yourself, right?
It's really funny. I do own a French horn, and I've
You do own a French horn?
Yes, I've practiced it a little bit, because I feel like as a composer, we need to understand all instruments, regardless of if we can play them super well or not. And I can only get a couple of notes out of the French horn, but understanding how you work with embouchure, how you work with the valves, has definitely helped me to understand what I can expect out of a really good French horn player. But no, I couldn't play any of this myself. No, I can't.
Okay. So considering that you can't play it yourself, but you can still make like a mock-up or a placeholder, meaning that you can prepare of what you're after. How does it work with you when you're working with a third party like this, Michael H. Dixon, that played the French horn? It's like, what have you prepared for him when he was joining in to make the music with the French horn?
Yes, the thing that's so amazing for me is because I come from a more oral tradition of music, in the sense I'm not a strong or quick music notation reader, but almost all the musicians I work with and record are incredible notation readers, and there's so many fantastic musicians here in Australia that are quick note readers, fantastic at interpreting the music, and they just get it. So many times the recording we use on the track is like the second, maybe third take, and that's it. It's music they've never heard before, never seen before. They just rock up into the studio, I put the correctly notated music in front of them, and then they just play. And that's exactly how it was here. So I've made a notated music sheet, like a classical musician would play from, and I didn't even send it to him ahead of time. He just rocked up in the studio, and I put my iPad in front of him with the music, and I let him listen to the song, and then we'll do a take. He's very, very calm and chill person. So he just did it. It's awe-inspiring how good these people are, because I know I
kind of get the feeling of people with brass instruments. They're really like down-to-earth, laid-back people. I don't know why.
I think it's the heaviness of the instrument, which just like you have to lug around these big things. My experience with double bass players, because the instruments are so huge and heavy that it's very chill people.
Yeah, they can't be hectic or energetic about it because it's heavy.
When they're in position, they can be, but not before that.
Yeah.
But no, this was super cool because I worked with, because he plays Michael H. Dixon plays a lot of early music repertoire with the Brandenburg Orchestra here in Sydney. So that's how I met him, because I worked at a concert venue where they were the symphony orchestra that I took care of the most. And I love early music. I love integrating early forms of dance music into my video game music, or early ideas of how to play. And so I've worked with a lot of early musicians. I love that style of music.
I see. We touched a little bit on the subject. I think that this might maybe have you repeat something from previous, but one other question from Aurora was where does all the inspiration come from when you're thinking about the different kind of sections and everything, the biome, so to speak, in this game?
I think it's a combination of how does it feel to be in a place, and that for me is what music is. Sound design in video games talks about how the world works. If a thing has a sound for it, then it usually has a purpose, either positive for the player or negative, and sometimes neutral as well. If you think about Super Mario is the Super Mario 3, for example, is such a great course in how to think about sound design. Everything that's positive for you goes up in pitch somehow, almost all of it. And negative stuff goes down when you die, when you lose health. When you jump and your head hits a block and there's something coming out of it, it's a positive sound. But when you jump and hit it and there's nothing coming out, it's just neutral, flat, middle. And that idea is what sound design is. It teaches you how the world works, what you can do and what you can't do and what you should do. While music is how it feels to be in that world. So that's always what I'm going for with video game music. How does it feel as a player who's just entered this world? How do I help them navigate how it feels to be here? And I work a lot with classical principles, that you have probably a very catchy A part, and you need to contrast that with a B part that's maybe more energetic or maybe in a different key than the first part and builds up back. So the idea with the B part is to provide contrast and make you long to come back to the A part. And then there's usually a C part as well to create even more contrast, so you don't get bored of the A to B forms.
Yeah.
But contrast, contrast and interest is what I try to build with all of these ambiances and music.
Okay. Considering that your music was sent to Iron Gate and you're working a little bit with, was it the CEO that gave a little bit feedback on the music and so on back and forth when you were working on it?
Yes.
And considering that you already had some music that were Viking inspired, did they come to you with more like references? Oh, we would like for this to be in this kind of vibe or emotion, or was it that right from the start that you like they trust you to provide?
I think we had a really good collaborative effort going. Like the Meadows, there was no, because we were quite early on in the process there. They didn't send what they wanted me to do, so I did what I thought would be suitable.
Yeah.
But with the sailing music, he had a very clear idea of how he wanted it to feel in the world. And I think the one that's in the game is the 5th iteration of that song. And I think the first one and the second one were just complete, like, no, these don't do what I want them to do. And I tried adding more folk music things in those demos, and that didn't work for what the CEO wanted the player to feel. While this is more cinematic, this is slightly more Hollywood, but it gets to the point very well. So we were banding about trying out different references that he would send me when he felt like, oh, it's not working, it's not doing what I wanted. So yes, he did send me a couple of different ideas to try out. The same with the music for the mountains. That's also the 5th iteration of that. And I trust him that he knows his product so well, and he's also good at communicating what he likes and doesn't like, that it was easy to go, it's not about what the music is, does the music enhance the game like it should? And for those few instances where we hadn't hit the mark yet, it's like, got to go back to the drawing board, and we did. And I think it turned out really well, because this Out for a Sailing Adventure, together with the Meadows, they're the 2 biggest sort of hits of the game, and the songs that people feel the most nostalgic about.
That sounds good. I love to when you're talking about these processes and so on. It really brings perspective, in my opinion.
Cool.
But one thing I would like to get a little bit more perspective on is, for me, as I usually work when I'm listening to music, I usually reference to other type of tracks or something like that. But for you who works from the beginning with something, you're like, oh, you don't have a reference and you're supposed to do something. You look at the content of the area, etc., to try and get an emotion. It's like, oh, I should start over on this end. But when you only see an environment, do you usually tend to think about all the types of music, or are you listening specifically? It's like, oh, this should sound like this game or this movie, for example.
I usually think through my experience of what I've composed, what I like it to be. Of course, you could do quite contrasting things. You could think like, oh, Valheim could have been a hip-hop soundtrack, because you want to do something just completely differently. But I think back to what I feel in my repertoire of things that I've listened to, what would suit, and I go for that initially. I don't think I try to go and make the most unobvious and strange contrasting thing, because usually in video game projects you don't have time for it if it's not thematically really suitable to do something strange. I don't think I do a lot of reference listening for myself when I like I don't get a soundtrack and then start to listen to other things composed and sort of try to imitate that. I more go I try instruments and I try feelings and keys and using compositional techniques to achieve that instead. And I think that I want to stay away from certain things. Like, it was very apparent that Valheim was going to be in the sort of Skyrim soundtrack area of things. But at that point, I hadn't played Skyrim and I hadn't listened to the soundtrack. And I really didn't want to go and listen to it, because I didn't want it to become, oh, he's trying to copy Skyrim. Exactly. Because I've only heard how good a soundtrack it is and how much it means to people. And if you try to copy the apparent things from a very famous soundtrack, I think you're just going to fall flat of not being that soundtrack, because people have heard that.
You're going to drop the ball a bit.
Well, it's not going to be possible, because it's just so good at what it does. What I try to do is I try to use with layers of abstraction when I analyze references, because it's not always what someone tells you that they like about the song that they actually like about the song. And this is a fun hidden secret technique. You can abstract something like, if a game comes and it's an action game and they say, oh, I really like this then you can look at what is it actually they like. They like the tempo, the energy of the song. And you can compose a song in a completely different genre, but has a similar energy level. And that can work equally as well. So you could go with symphony orchestra energy and get the same feeling as if it is what a techno song gives. Of course, it won't sound like a techno song. And that might be a cool thing, or it might just completely miss the mark as well. But I try to have that level of abstraction when I compose video game music.
Okay. Interesting.
But I do listen to a lot of music, and I have listened to a lot of music. So I feel like I have a grand library in my head of how many things sound. But there are games where you have to compose in a style that you haven't done before. And then, of course, I have to go and sit down. Like I did a game which needed mariachi music, which is not a genre I've done before.
Oh, okay.
And that was really fun to get to look at what's the music theory of mariachi, what's the cultural significance, why are the instruments played the way they are, and understanding what sounds correct or not. Because I teach composition for year 11 and 12 students here in Australia. And sometimes they have to compose in genres they don't listen to. And it's really hard when you don't know a genre because you don't know what sounds right or wrong. Like, for example, you can write great classical style melodies, but if you put in going from a dominant to a subdominant chord, for most parts of classical music, that's going to sound incredibly wrong. Because it's just such a taken like fact. You never go from dominant to subdominant. You always go subdominant to dominant. There are, of course, there are as with all rules, there are exceptions, but that's the thing that makes it sound classical. And if you don't do that, you're going to be out immediately. And so with the mariachi music, I had to listen. What are the chord progressions they use, and what are the other chords they allow themselves, and why they do that. And I love that, getting to study other styles of music.
Okay. Oh, interesting. I really like that. But moving on to the next track. This is going to be a long one. We're not going to listen to the full track, so people just have to believe that, it is multiple sections within this one that I'm going to talk a little bit more, or we're going to talk a little bit more as soon as we get back from it.
Yes.
And so the next track we're going to listen to is Mistlands Unveiling Distant Memories. Mistlands Unveiling Distant Memories. My motion for this one. One long track for 11 minutes and 27 seconds to be precise. In this track we have multiple sections of music going through multiple emotions. Calm, happy, curious, and afraid.
Ooh.
I don't have too much more to add on this one because it was a really special one to listen to. First of all, it is one of the longer tracks on this soundtrack, but it felt so serene overall with this one. So I definitely need a little bit more context to this track.
Yes, this is an interesting one because the original melody came out of a demo I made because I was listening to the theme from Game of Thrones. And I wanted to try and imagine what if I would make a main theme that described all of Valheim, what would that theme be? And it wasn't made to be in any biome or part of the game more than potentially the menu. Yeah. So it was just a fun test. And the main melody here is the B part melody. For the original I made was like an A melody, a B melody, and a C melody of different levels of intensity. But it was never used for anything. So when Mistlands came in, I felt like it's a good time to revisit the old demos. Is there something that could fit? Because it's in the style of Valheim, but is there something we could reuse for something new? And that's where Mistlands came from. And because we talked about the length of time that people listen to tracks, I wanted to make a multi-layered track that was longer. And because we didn't have at that point good systems for playing back multi-layered things, I sort of had to compose the whole length of the track. So that the main played theme is about 3.5 minutes. And then I make a more ambient version. So try to peel back and make it more ambient. And the second time around, then even more ambient. So you just hear the harmonies in your head on the sort of the third time it's looped. And then it comes back to the melody again. So it gives you more time to be in it before you get tired of it. Because I knew that people were going to play this for a long time. But this is my Harry Potter meets, or like a magical world meets Valheim. And it's funny that I thought about that first, and I didn't know at that point that they were going to add magic to the game as well. So that was just a bonus thing. But because the Mistlands, this is the second to last update we've released not too long ago, Ashlands. And that main theme is about 18.5 minutes. No, it's even longer, I think.
Yeah.
So I'm going longer and longer with every biome track.
Are you trying to push it as long as possible until they say no? It's like, you can't make songs longer.
I haven't gotten a no yet, so I'm quite happy about
exactly.
that.
Soon we'll have 1 hour long. And it was like, when did this happen?
They're just like,
and then they just look through.
Okay. They're just like, oh yeah, okay, we'll go with it. But this one, it's also that feeling of veiledness, because when people see Mistlands, some have said that they were expecting a different type of music. But I think Mistlands is the type of place where you spend a prolonged time with it, you start to see it differently, because it's veiled in mist for quite a long time until you get this item that releases
clears it
exactly.
up a bit.
And you see it. And because I knew I needed music that was going to work for both when the mist is on and when it isn't, because we didn't have any system to be able to switch between those two modes. So it's slow moving, but a lot of the enemies in the Mistlands are also slow moving. So I feel that painted picture of that area quite well with something that's sort of slow and magical and moving. And the feeling that it's always been there. This is a very ancient country. And it's going to be there after you leave as well. And because it's also a hard continent to sort of settle on. That lends it to this feeling of, I don't think you find many human-built remnants or ruins there.
Structures.
Exactly. But you find there's a living race of creatures there, the dvergr, for example. So they have adapted to the place and made it their own. They become one with country. And in a way that humans have not yet. So it's just so old, and that's what I wanted to go for. So the melody, the musical sheet I wrote has ideas of like triumphant yet bittersweet, mysterious like a sunken world, and longing, elegant yet relaxed.
That sounds a little bit about the emotions I specifically wrote down here. Calm, happy, curious, afraid.
What a wonderful combo of things.
Yeah. It's a cacophony of everything a little bit.
Exactly. And that's one of the things I wanted to, a new technique I wanted to try with this melody, because all melodies previously almost have been played by one instrument, maybe two. Yeah. But in this one, I wanted to create a new instrument out of several instruments playing the same line at different octaves between each other. So we have both, there's normal like flute you have in a in the symphony orchestra. There's an alto flute, which is a lower, breathier, earthier flute, clarinet, and cello in octaves being played on the main melody. And I think there's double bass playing the melody as well.
But then utilizing a little bit of other techniques and so on with this, was this also to provide a little bit of information with this biome that it's more foreign to the player itself?
I think the timbre I wanted was to be this, make it feel big, lumbering, but at the same time powerful and fragile. Because you would have the fragile instruments coming more to the forefront, but also this very stable melody, because you had the double bass as a big instrument, you had the cello, the clarinet. And so I wanted to experiment more with timbre meaning the color of the sound and which instruments I chose. And that was really fun to do with this track.
Yeah. And considering this 11-minute track right now, is this just a setup or work together with the dynamic tracks that you can hear in the game, or do you have the exact same track with and without the mist?
It's exactly the same track with and without the mist, because when we were, I mean, that's the thing. Now we potentially have more alternatives and time to develop a music playback system that can accommodate that. But at the time, we didn't have time to do that. So we just had to trudge on and write the music for the technology we had at hand. But I think that those limitations really help create interesting things. And that, in general, for all creative endeavors, when you can't do anything, then you actually have to look at what you can do and you do something interesting.
Interesting. Another topic that I would like to touch a little bit upon, we talked a little bit about different tracks, we talked about people listening to the tracks and so on. And since it's an early access game, we talked a little bit about making some changes and so on. Have you ever returned to a track to change it because of fans have reacted to it?
Yes, I have. And I would say the next track we're going to listen to after this one is because it became such a hit and people really loved it. People in the game loved spending time with it, and the people at the company also felt it was a banging tune. It was just like a minute long, because it was supposed to be just a place you go to and you quickly go out of there, go away from there. I chose to extend the track to almost 4 minutes.
Okay.
So that was something that was done to increase it. I've also written a couple of other tracks for Meadows, which I'd like to have in, and that's one of my sort of extension goals for when we get closer to 1.0 is to add more dynamic tracks for different weathers in biomes that already exist. So like, because Meadows, when it rains, is a very different feel from Meadows when there's fog.
When there's sun.
Fog and when it's sunny. So I'd like to, and especially when you're out sailing and it's raining, that's an incredibly atmospheric feeling, but I don't think that the sailing track that's there now is correct for that. So that's one of my hopes, that I will get time to add more songs to places to make them feel the gamut of experience that are already there.
Okay. Interesting.
One can hope.
But with this, yeah. But with this, I don't have any follow-up questions specifically for this track. So I feel ready that we're going to dive into the last track of the week, if you are.
I am. I think we should. I think that I've gotten to say all I wanted about this one, and the last song is a nice way to tie this bag together, because we're coming back to that folk music that inspired me to make Meadows. I just want to do a quick shout out. There's two folk music groups that have inspired me immensely with the sound. One is Lyy, Lyy, which is a Swedish group, and the other one is Kongeru, and I would say Kongeru and Kraja, Kraja, and Kongero. And the guy who plays the key fiddle part in the next track is the key fiddle player from Lyy, who's a friend of mine, and he was supposed to play at my master exam opera, but didn't have time in the end, so we had another fantastic player come in. But it was really nice because he recorded himself. I sent him the score, and he recorded it, and it was just, it's such a beauty to hear the key fiddle and all of the ornaments that he knows, because he's such a fantastic folk music musician, and that came So in the original track, it was just samples first, and then I did a recording with a key fiddle player here in... she's actually the cellist who plays on all other tracks. Her name is Freya Schack Arnott, and she has a key fiddle as well. But because it's so humid sometimes and so hot in Sydney, a lot of the key fiddles seize up because it's such a wooden moving instrument. So we had trouble with one key, the E flat key. And so I thought I want to try to see if I record it in Sweden and add that on top of it. So it's 2 key fiddles in one. And because he's foremost, David, my friend, folk music player, he just added so many embellishments to the melody that was... I could hear them, but I couldn't because I haven't studied folk music formally or played it. I've listened a lot to it. He just added all the stuff that I loved. And yes, we're going to hear that track. And I hope you enjoy it because I absolutely loved working on this track.
Awesome. So with that said, we're diving straight into the last track of the week. And this is The Wandering Adventures of Halldor and Hallstein. Last track of the week. This was The Wandering Adventures of Halldor and Hallstein. And my emotion for this last track was, I really like this track. It is playful, it is fun to listen to. The track itself gives me off the vibe of a carnival, festival, or a fair that comes to town. Currently, I can see the Millennial Fair from the SNES game Chrono Trigger. Funny transaction there, right?
Ooh, very good one.
Yeah, but I believe it suits very well for that type of setting. So that was my emotion.
It's an interesting one that I love Chrono Cross and Chrono Trigger soundtrack. They're absolutely big,
exactly.
Big
That's why I was so happy when you were talking like straight from the bat here today that you were referring to JRPGs and specifically Chrono Trigger and Chrono Cross.
It's funny because it's such a meeting point because between Swedish music and Japanese music, because for a long time I was so inspired by Japanese music, and then I tried to make my own version of my music inspired by Japanese music, and for me it felt fake in the sense that it didn't sound truthful to the music that I like from Japan.
Okay.
And when I traveled to Japan for the first time, it became very apparent to me that why it was fake, and it's because I didn't integrate who I was into it, and I haven't grown up in Japan. I don't know how it is to live in Japan, and so I went back to Sweden and thought about where do I come from, what have I listened to, and it is Scandinavian folk music that I love and grown up with, and so that's what I wanted to integrate. So this is my meeting point between the JRPGs that I grew up with, but also the folk music that I grew up with, and I felt I could believably use in the soundtrack.
But when you're utilizing those words right now, are you referring to the soundtrack itself, or are you referring to this song specifically when I talked about JRPG specifically?
It's mostly, I would say, in this song in particular, but the story with Valheim and folk music was that one of the early boss battle music songs I made was more sound-wise akin to The Witcher in the sort of instrumentation, how it sounded, because a lot of folk music has crossover with medieval instruments. And I was told that the boss didn't like key fiddles, which I thought was an absolute shame because it's one of the coolest instruments ever. And I wanted to use that. And so I had this in the back of my mind that I can't really use the full gamut of my folk music inspirations until we got to this point. And I did 2 demos, and this was one of them. The team seemed to absolutely love this one. I felt like finally I can use the key fiddle. I can make this dancey, lovely, happy thing. And the thing that's really fun with this melody is that I wanted to make a theme that's both in a major key and a minor key, but without necessarily switching too much between them. So technically, I'll try to explain this in a good way so that everybody can understand. Usually, if you use certain scale degrees, intervals in a scale, they will tell you what the scale you're in. So you usually divide an octave into like 7 notes in an octave, and the 8th note is the octave. And if you play the 3rd note, that's usually a major third, which we can say is a happy note, or a minor third, which is a slightly more sad version of the note. But if you don't play the 3rd at all, you just omit it in the melody, if you play a major 6th or a minor 6th, that sort of has an implication of which scale you're in. Because it's more common, if you have a major 6th, to have a major 3rd and a minor 6th, a minor 3rd. But I want to play with that here, so I play a minor 6th, thus indicating that it is a minor key, and then when I play the 3rd, I play a major 3rd instead. So you have this dum da dum da da na na num, which sounds sort of minor key-ish, but then you get the major 3rd when you go down, and so we wanted to give this idea of Haldor as a merchant, because you find him as a merchant around the world, and he's there in his sort of invincibility bubble together with his Lox Halstein. Or Halstein, I actually don't know which one pronunciation-wise we should go for. But you find him there.
we do us there.
Exactly.
we decide.
We decide. And the team and I wanted to portray him as this sort of shifty merchant figure that both sells things to you, but you don't necessarily know how he get a hold of these things. And he's a dverg, and he's lived for a long time. So we just wanted to be obscure his personality and his traits a little bit. That's why we're doing both the minor key innuendo and the major key innuendo, and then switching between them, which I felt worked great with Scandinavian folk music.
Kind of to try and you don't really know where you have him, but the end result feels very happy, dancey, and inviting, though.
Exactly, and if you start to look at it, you start to pose more questions, and that's exactly what I wanted.
But considering this music, is this music starting to play when you're closing in on Haldor then? Or how does the dynamic thing work here with the music?
Because the whole system in Valheim is a sort of music changeover system, and you can designate an area to have a new track, and when you go into that area, the track switches over from one to the other. So when you walk inside of the bubble, then you switch over from the Black Forest music into this one.
Okay. So when it comes to Haldor and Halstein, you already knew about this character, the type of the looks and something like that, or
yes, was it blank? I was sent the character and how they look in the game, so I had a playthrough where they were walking around and looking and interacting and buying things. And then this character was such a big hit that they added his sister Hildur, who sells garments, and so there's a counter melody. Not that they work together, but there's a music in the same vein for her as well in the game.
And since you made it in the same kind of vein, was this in order to have them more connected with each other, even though they're not traveling together?
Exactly.
Per se.
Exactly. That's the cool thing I like with music, and we did back in Lake Ridden as well, is to provide musical clues and how things are connected. Could both be themes that can be played on top of each other, themes that are from the same melodic base or thematic base, or just stylistically. So yeah, because Valheim's so big, it's nice to let the music play a thematic role in orienting you how things are connected and what is happening.
That feels dangerous as well when you're trying to refer something and it might be lost in translation, like it goes over people's heads as well, especially people that are not so fond of music per se.
That's a nice thing. You should be able to play the game without seeing any of these things. These are Easter eggs for the people who want to or happen upon them, and they're not important in the sense that they will, if you don't understand them or find them, it destroys the game experience. This is only for fun, but it glues the musical world and the world of Valheim together in a way that feels like they're of the same cloth, which I like.
But it gives lore, like you said.
Exactly.
It gives lore to the world without being written somewhere in a journal or anything.
Exactly, and giving lore is alluring.
It is. But is there anything else you would like to talk about specifically surrounding this specific track? Or because I have two more questions that I kind of want to end it all with surrounding Valheim.
Probably mostly that I'm so happy that I got to have a track that was Scandinavian folk music inspired and that was a hit, both with the team developing it and the people playing it. Was really fun, and it is that this is summer dancing music basically, but it has that sort of wintry introspectiveness edge to it, and I'm really happy I got to do this. But it's also a thing that's been developed with the game, that they're adding characters out in the world that get their own themes, because you as a main character don't really have a theme, but the characters you meet get their own themes, and that gives flavor to where you come. And I think that's a line that they're going to continue to go towards.
But it sounds good as well, because if you're adding a tune specifically to characters, it gives them a little bit of importance as well. It's like you're supposed to interact with these due to the fact that, hey, we're hinting, instead of putting a lot of red arrows pointing at the character.
Exactly. Make
it more music.
Make it more
luring you in.
They want, lure you in with music.
Yeah. Sounds good. So then I think I can step right into the two last questions then, maybe.
Please do.
Yeah, these are not from me specifically. This is from the listener Jocelyn, who were wondering. There are two questions that are more open wide surrounding this. And the first one I would like to ask you is, did you learn something new while you composed the music for Valheim?
Oh yes, I feel like I've learned heaps of new things, like this way of combining hinting at a major or minor thing. Absolutely learned of. It's actually the initial idea came from, not for this track, it was another track, but my colleague Marlin wrote a track which skirted. It was actually for the game that we worked on with you, Chris. But she did both minor and major key and shifting between those two and obscuring which key it was in, which I thought was really, for me, when I heard it first, I thought, no, we can't do this. That's not the way she'd done it. I thought was not how you do it. But my friend is very, she's a cool customer. So she said, no, this is a Marlin thing, stays in. And so I'm like, cool, I'm going to listen to this again. And I really gained an appreciation for that. This was a musical technique that could be incredibly useful. And the way the Mistlands theme is sort of composed in that same vein, because it's a minor, I think it's in the minor key, but uses a major 7 at one point, which is not as common in classical music and especially in a minor key. And so this is the logical extension of the Mistlands way of writing music. So I've absolutely learned a lot from that. I've learned a lot with orchestration. I've learned a lot about, because we did a project together with Helsingborg Symphony Orchestra, and they've played 2 medleys of Valheim music the last 2 years. And it was really cool.
That's awesome.
It was super cool, and such fantastic musicians, and working together with a conductor, Jakob Hultberg, who is a fantastic conductor, and you can see how well the symphony orchestra responds to him and he responds to the orchestra, and it just makes it sound...
It's playful, I guess.
It is, and it just makes the music come alive in a way I didn't think was possible. And getting to see that the orchestrational techniques that I've put into the music, even though when it's just been in the game, because you can always mix something to sound good, not always, but most of the time. And seeing that with live musicians, you can make it sound even better than you thought when you have a whole orchestra to work with. So I learned heaps how to work with that, which was really cool. And lastly, I think I learned a lot from the team of Iron Gate, of getting to work with them on a project over a long time, because almost all projects I've worked on before have been short stints to like upwards of a year, maybe a little bit more. But with Valheim, we're now into almost third and a half. And getting to stay with a product and try new things and develop them and make something that's even better, and just striving for fun and excellence continuously is really cool. And they're a lovely bunch of people to work with as well. So I feel incredibly happy that I've gotten to work with this and continue to work with them.
That's amazing. That sounds so good.
Yeah. And thank you also to Aurora and Jocelyn for the questions. That was absolutely lovely of you to pose them.
Yeah, absolutely amazing. I love both of all the questions that we got in. We have one more to go. And this one is super interesting as well. And it's, of course, considering Valheim and its fame. So considering the fame that Valheim have gotten, what did that mean to you as a composer? What doors have opened for you?
It's basically meant the difference.
Everything.
It really is a lot to pack into that one, because when a project finished, you have to go out and try to get more freelance work. And after Valheim, I haven't had to. It's just people have wanted more of what I compose, and they come to me for it. So I actually haven't had to look for any work since Valheim.
So you haven't opened a door; you have opened a floodgate.
Yeah, yes, but it's a very controlled floodgate, because it's been really nice and steady. Of course, there has been one period where everybody wanted music at exactly the same time, which is why we had to grow the team and get more freelance collaborators, which I'm incredibly thankful for. But yeah, it's been eye-opening how much this has meant for my professional career, and also that what I really like doing, other people also seem to do, to like to listen to, and that's really cool. And now there's stories of Valheim music out in the world, and real people listening to them and doing things with them. I know that Valheim music has been played at a wedding in England, for example. I thought that was really cool. And
did you know specifically which song as well?
Yeah, they asked if I had the arrangement for it, and I sent what I had. I didn't have it in a piano arrangement.
So they actually have a small little quintet or something like that.
It was actually piano who played it, but I sent the MIDI material and the melodies, notated melodies I had, and they solved the rest. But yeah, I'm living a fantastic life, getting to do what I love to do, and I'm so happy that I get to do this.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And I think that's a great ending note for closing down the episode where we talk about Valheim. And we're following up now instead of a little bit more about you again. It's like, what's the next step now when it comes to your career? Is there anything you can talk about?
I am working on a project right now, which we're finishing up. One of my big deadlines is tomorrow, but we have a little bit left to go. I can't say what it is, but hopefully it will be talked about soon, because it's really cool. It's a joint soundtrack between me and my colleague Carla Dobby, and Marlin, my other colleague, has also written some things and some solos for it. But we've gotten to do jazz, we've gotten to do 1940s, 50s jazz, we've gotten to do surf music, we've gotten to do time-appropriate cinematic music, and we recorded that with like a brass quintet and rhythm group and string quartet, which has been massive and so cool. So that's something I would love to come back and chat to you about. But actually, I'll get my colleague Carla to talk about that, because what the music she has done for the game is absolutely fantastic and was super fun to get to. It's not often you get to collaborate as a composer. Me and Marlin do it a lot, collaborate on both the music and the sound design, but getting to do that even more with more people feels like a luxury. And I think that's I'd love to do more collaborations. I've been thinking about maybe we could have some collaborations between games, like saying I invite a composer to co-compose a track for Valheim, and I go and co-compose a track with them for another game, because it feels like composers, because we have to.
That sounds like an amazing like experiment to do as well.
That would be
To
cool.
get more like a collective up.
Exactly.
Where everybody's working.
Exactly, because I know it's such a shame that we as composers have to fight each other for the few jobs that exist. But if we can try and collaborate and show off each other cool things, then I think that could lead to more instead.
Yeah, I think so as well. I think you're onto something there.
Ooh. Lovely.
I think so.
But yeah, there's lots of fun things coming out soon that we get to talk about. But I think that one's the big one.
Yeah, and of course, for people that are joined in on the Discord for this podcast, we will of course try to cover all the VGM releases you're doing as well. And then of course we're going to talk a little bit more to Carlo and about the track
Exactly.
game.
And I should also say, because the roadmap for Valheim is very open and public, there will be more music coming, and I have lots of hopes and dreams for what I want to add to the game before version 1.0, like weather-specific versions of tunes for different biomes. And more sailing music.
And I hope that you will be able to do those then.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, I think that's about it. That's the talk we had for Valheim and the talk we have for you. So for people that are interested in talking to you or talking to you for any sort of music inquiries, so on, how can they get in contact with you, Patrik?
The easiest way is either go to www.solidsounds.se or send me a mail, which is available on there. Otherwise, it's patrick@solidsounds.se is probably the easiest. Because we're always looking for new and fun things to do. And now that we've grown a team with jazz musicians and classical musicians and sound designers and technical sound designers, we are looking for some more interesting and fun projects. So if you have something where you think the Valheim music would be a good fit, or you want to challenge us, try something different, because we've done quite a lot of different genres which are available on the webpage. Have a listen and get in touch, and we'll make a demo and see what you think of that.
Amazing. So with that, is there any final words you would like to shout out to people? Like, don't forget to tie shoelaces.
I would say thank you to everyone who's played Valheim and both contacted me and enjoyed that world. It's meant heaps for me and everybody involved in the project getting to be a part of this, and keep sending the fun stories of how Valheim lives in the world. And we will keep making lots of fun music for you to enjoy in-game and outside as well. And thank you to all the fantastic musicians who have recorded for all the soundtracks we have worked on. I know I haven't gotten to mention everyone, but I look forward to seeing you all in studio soon.
Sweet. No, but that's amazing. That's amazing. You know, it's been a blast to have you here.
Thank you so much,
Talking
Chris.
to you for 2 hours now. It's crazy. It's going to be an amazing episode with this one.
Woohoo! Thank you so much, Chris, for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure to get to chat with you again.
Yeah, definitely. No, but for people, you need to understand a little bit. Patrik is living in Australia when we're recording this, so we have the whole time period and everything sitting on. Like, if I put a bread on the floor here and he puts a bread, we have a sandwich, a world sandwich almost.
Oh yeah, tasty world sandwich.
Or is it? I don't know. We'll see. We'll talk about that another time.
We will.
No, but definitely, thank you so much for joining in and talking to me on this one. It's been a blast. So for everybody else who are interested in listening to other episodes of the Gameable Audio, you find those at our homepage at videospelsklubben.se, Spotify, or in your closest podcast app. Feel free to follow and comment on any of our social medias. You can either find us on Facebook or on Instagram. Just search for Gameable Audio and you'll find us there. You can also support this podcast for future content and quality upgrades. But in the end, let's support composers. So think about becoming a Patreon. The current awesome backers that we do have today is Daniel Onemark, Lars Schenström, Titti Schenström, Kevin Wikström, and Mike Björkholm. And of course, all the links where you can either buy or support Patrik or the company now that works on Valheim, you'll find all those links in the main post at videospelsklubben.se. And the next episode is going to be a very special one. And it's crazy, Patrik. Do you know that the next episode I'm going to release and record is my 200th episode?
No, I didn't know that. That is fantastic. Well, you're really good at what you do, so you have staying power.
I have staying power. I'm not recording every Monday anymore, so I'm still staying. I'm just doing it a little bit less, but I'm still around. But yeah, for the 200th episode, I would like for people that are listening in on this episode, please write a little bit of message so I can get a little bit of your love, like what I've done for you guys. Have I gotten you to get interested in buying video game music, maybe a video game, etc.? I would love to hear some stories about people listening in on this podcast. And if somebody wants to record a little bit of a video, not a video message, but an audio message that I would like, that I'm going to include in the episode, feel free to send that one to my email as well. But all the information will be sent out on the social pages. So go through that one and I'll take it from there. And the podcast theme music was, as usual, composed by the amazing Thor Myrdal. So with that said, I want to thank Patrik yet again.
Woohoo! Thank you, Chris.
Thank you very much for joining in.
Hope you have a lovely day, everyone.
Yeah. So with that said, take care, everybody. And see you all guys next time.
Nice.